You'd never have noticed him in the crowd. Not in a million years. On a sweltering July afternoon, 47,000 fans packed into the roaring stadium to watch the championship game. The scent of pretzels, hot dogs, and spilled beer hung thick in the humid air. And weaving between the rows, wearing a faded orange cap and an apron that had seen better days, was Walter King. "Peanuts! Cold drinks! Hot dogs!" he called, his voice already hoarse from a dozen years of shouting over the crowd. To the fans, he was just another vendor. A guy with a tray full of overpriced snacks, weaving up and down the aisles, exchanging crumpled bills for lukewarm soda. But Walter was more than he seemed. Much more. For over a decade, he'd walked these same rows. For over a decade, he'd studied faces, memorized habits, learned who tipped, who pocketed receipts, who brought cash, and who carried cards. And on this particular July afternoon, as his tray clinked with bottles and his cash pouch bulged beneath his apron, Walter was already counting down the hours. Because tonight, everything would change. Let me ask you something. If you spent 12 years blending into the background, ignored, underestimated, invisible, and you had the chance to change your life in a single night, would you take it? Tell me what you'd do in the comments below. Walter made his way down to the end of section 112 and paused at the railing, scanning the stadium floor below. On the sidelines, the players huddled. Cameras zoomed in. Fans screamed as the kickoff whistle blew. But Walter wasn't watching the game. Not really. He was watching something else. Someone else. Down by the dugout, near the press box, two men in sharp suits sat behind the protective netting. One of them glanced up at Walter, just briefly, and gave the smallest of nods. Walter's pulse quickened. It was time to work. He adjusted his cap, straightened his tray, and pushed off into the sea of people. One last day of selling. One last chance to walk out free. And no one, not a single soul in the stadium, suspected a thing. Walter worked the stadium aisles like a man on autopilot. Row by row, seat by seat, he sold peanuts and sodas to fans who never bothered to remember his name. "Peanuts! Cold drinks! Hot dogs!" he'd call, smiling faintly at every customer. But underneath the well-practiced grin, his mind was razor-sharp. Every bill, every transaction, every eye contact was part of the plan. Tonight wasn't just another game. Tonight was the culmination of 12 years of quiet observation, and one very big gamble. It started 2 hours before kickoff. Walter had arrived at the loading dock as usual, a little before 5 p.m., to pick up his vendor tray and his apron. The warehouse boss barely glanced at him. Section 112 again, Walt. You know the drill. Walter smiled politely. Yes, sir. But tucked under his apron, between stacks of napkins and straws, was a slim black pouch filled with something no one would have expected from a vendor. Inside were 3 sets of counterfeit wristbands, 5 USB drives, and a tiny glass vial containing something he hoped he wouldn't have to use. And under his tray, in a hidden compartment he'd spent months crafting, lay a burner phone already buzzing with a single text. It's live. Clock's ticking. He'd planned this night down to the second. From the high roller who always paid cash for front row seats and never counted his change, to the security guard at Gate 3 who always took a smoke break at the top of the 7th inning, to the stadium's ancient payment system that hadn't seen an upgrade since the early 2000s. It was all laid out like a playbook. Halfway through the 2nd inning, he'd already moved over $1,200 in concessions. On paper, nothing unusual. On the tablet he slipped under the table during breaks, though the real number was closer to $150,000. Silent transactions funneled through cloned payment cards and ghost accounts he'd been setting up for months. Here's something to think about. If you had the chance to quietly outsmart the system, take everything you felt it owed you, and walk away without anyone noticing, would you do it? Or would you stick to the rules? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Walter already knew his answer. By the 4th inning, the 2 men in suits, the ones behind the dugout, were both on their phones, glancing his way. The signal was clear. Phase 2. Walter took a deep breath, straightened his cap, and slipped down the tunnel into the vendor service hallway. The roar of the crowd faded behind him, replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint smell of bleach. He turned a corner, and there she was. A woman in her late 30s, wearing a headset and carrying a clipboard. She was supposed to be just another operations manager. But she wasn't. Not tonight. "You're late," she murmured. "The window's shrinking." "Had to make it look good," he replied calmly. "Where's the box?" She nodded to the utility closet at the end of the hall. "In there. We've got 7 minutes before cameras come back online. Don't miss." Walter gave her a faint smile as he walked past her and opened the door. Inside, in the dark, sat a nondescript gray lockbox with a keypad on top. And when he punched in the code, the same 4 digits he'd carried in his mind for months, it beeped once and unlocked. Inside was the reason he'd spent 12 years in this stadium. Bundles of cash, pristine and banded, stacked like bricks. More than 2 million already, waiting. And that was just the beginning. Walter's hands didn't even shake as he began transferring the stacks into his hidden tray compartment. The bundles fit snugly into the false bottom of Walter's tray. He'd designed it himself, reinforced plastic, perfectly weighted, impossible to notice at a glance. When he closed it and slipped the latches back into place, the tray looked just like it had when he walked into the closet. Bottled water. Peanuts. Soda. Nothing to see here. Walter gave the woman with the clipboard a final nod as he passed her. "It's done." She handed him a folded scrap of paper as he walked by. "New routing number. You'll need it at the end." He didn't look at it yet. He couldn't. Because when he pushed through the service door back into the blinding light of the stadium concourse, he nearly collided with security. 2 uniformed guards stood shoulder to shoulder, scanning the crowd as they chatted over the radios clipped to their shoulders. One of them glanced his way, frowning slightly. "Hey." Walter didn't break stride. Didn't speed up, didn't slow down. "Evening, fellas," he said, holding up his tray with a faint smile. "Peanuts. Soda." They both shook their heads and waved him on without another word. Walter kept moving, forcing himself not to exhale until he was back in the stands, surrounded by yelling fans. By the top of the 7th inning, he'd worked his way back to section 112, right where he was supposed to be. Every step, every aisle, every smiling "thank you" to customers was part of the camouflage. And yet, he could feel the sweat on the back of his neck. Someone was watching. He could feel it. Sure enough, 2 rows down, he caught sight of a familiar face. The second man in the sharp suit, still sitting near the dugout. But now he wasn't on the phone. Now he was watching Walter. Their eyes met. The man nodded once, slowly, and Walter felt a surge of something between fear and triumph. You ever feel like you're right on the edge? Like one more step and it all comes crashing down? But you take it anyway. Would you? Or would you stop before it's too late? Let me know in the comments. Walter already made his choice. The clock was ticking. By the time the 8th inning ended, his burner phone buzzed again. Gate 3. Walter began moving faster, weaving through the crowds and slipping into the concourse. At Gate 3, just as predicted, the guard was outside on his smoke break, chatting with another vendor. No cameras. No one paying attention. Walter slipped through the gate and into the cool night air. On the street, a black SUV waited at the curb. The back door popped open, and the woman with the clipboard motioned him in. As soon as the door shut behind him, she let out a breath. That's 2.4. Not bad for one night. Walter met her eyes in the rearview mirror and smiled faintly. Just another game. But he wasn't done yet. Not even close. The SUV sped away from the stadium, blending into late-night traffic like just another car heading home. In the back seat, Walter loosened his apron and sat back, his fingers finally unclenching from the tray's handles. The woman, who'd introduced herself as Marissa weeks ago, typed quickly on a tablet, her expression unreadable. "You did good," she said without looking up. "Transfer cleared. The first $2.4 million is already moving." Walter allowed himself a small, dry chuckle. Not bad for a guy selling peanuts. Marissa glanced at him then, the corner of her mouth quirking up just slightly. "Don't get cocky. We're not out yet." And she was right. Because halfway across the city, someone had noticed. The stadium's head of security stood alone in the operations office, replaying the feed from Gate 3. He didn't know what he was seeing at first, just a vendor slipping out through the gate. But something about the way Walter moved. Too calm. Too smooth. The way he didn't even look up at the guard. The head of security frowned and picked up the phone. "Yeah. I think you better get down here. We might have a situation. And here's where you come in. If you knew you'd pulled off a perfect plan, but someone might already be on your trail, would you stop and hide? Or would you double down? Let me know in the comments below, because Walter already made his choice." Back in the SUV, Marissa tucked her tablet into her bag and handed Walter a fresh burner phone. "From here, you're on your own. You know the route." Walter nodded, already reciting it in his head. Union Station. Locker 17. Train to Chicago. Then Detroit. Then Toronto. Good. Don't call me. Don't stop. And whatever happens. She met his eyes, her voice sharp now. Don't look back. The SUV slowed to a stop on a quiet corner, and Walter stepped out, adjusting his cap as if nothing had happened. Marissa's window rolled down just long enough for her to say, "You're not just selling peanuts anymore, Walter. Don't forget that." And then she was gone. Walter walked the last few blocks on foot, weaving through late-night crowds. The city felt different now, louder, harsher. Every siren in the distance made his pulse quicken. At Union Station, he ducked into the locker room and opened number 17. Inside was a simple duffel bag. Cash. A passport. A train ticket to Chicago. Walter slung it over his shoulder, but before he closed the locker, he noticed something taped to the inside. A tiny slip of paper. And on it, in Marissa's careful handwriting, just 3 words. "They know already." For the first time that night, Walter felt his calm crack. He glanced over his shoulder and thought he saw someone watching him from the far end of the locker room. A man in a suit, holding a phone to his ear. Eyes locked on Walter. Walter slammed the locker shut and walked quickly toward the platform. But in his head, he was already recalculating. It wasn't just about walking free anymore. Now, it was about staying alive. Walter kept his head down as he boarded the train to Chicago, his duffel slung casually over his shoulder. To anyone watching, he was just another tired commuter catching a late-night ride out of town. But behind his calm exterior, his mind was racing. They know already. Those 3 words sat like a stone in his chest. Marissa had warned him not to look back. But now, with every passing minute, he wondered if he'd underestimated just how fast they'd catch on. The train hissed and lurched forward. The platform slid away into darkness. Walter allowed himself a quiet breath. Phase 3 had begun. He just had to stay ahead of them. The first 30 minutes were uneventful. Passengers dozed in their seats. A few scrolled on their phones. But at the next stop, Walter felt his pulse spike. 2 men in suits stepped onto the train and began walking slowly down the aisle. Both wore earpieces. Both scanned every row, their eyes sharp. Walter tightened his grip on his duffel. He knew this was possible, but he hadn't expected them to be this quick. He stood abruptly and made his way to the next car, pretending to stretch his legs. The 2 men didn't follow immediately, but he could feel their eyes on his back. At the end of the next car, he ducked into the restroom, locked the door, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to panic, just for a second. His chest heaved as he opened the duffel, checked the cash, checked the passport. Everything was there. Everything was still intact. But he couldn't stay on this train. If they were already here, Chicago wouldn't be far enough. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number Marissa had given him for emergencies. It rang once, twice. Then a cool voice answered. "Say nothing. Car 7. Emergency hatch. Now." The line went dead. Walter wasted no time. He slipped out of the restroom and moved quickly toward car 7. When he reached it, he spotted the emergency hatch above the connecting door. No one was watching. He climbed onto the little ledge, popped the latch, and hoisted himself up into the cold night air. The train clattered beneath him, wind whipping at his jacket. But he didn't stop. He crawled to the rear of the car and jumped. The fall knocked the breath out of him, but he landed on the gravel shoulder of the tracks, rolling twice before coming to a stop. He lay there for a moment, staring up at the stars. And then, he smiled. Because even though his ribs ached and his palms were cut, he was ahead again. Sometimes, the only way to win is to take the leap, even if it scares you. Would you have jumped? Or would you have stayed on the train? Tell me what you'd do in the comments below. Walter stood, dusted himself off, and started walking toward the distant lights of a gas station at the edge of the highway. He still had cash. He still had the duffel. And now, he had time. But behind him, far down the tracks, a figure in a black coat stepped out from the tree line. Watching. Waiting. Because for all of Walter's planning, someone else was playing this game, too. Walter kept his head down as he crossed the highway shoulder and slipped into the glow of the gas station lights. He could still feel the cut on his palm throbbing with each heartbeat. But the adrenaline kept him moving. He ducked inside and bought a bottle of water, some bandages, and a prepaid phone card. The clerk didn't even look up at him. Just another tired man passing through on another quiet night. But out of habit, Walter checked the windows as he stepped back outside. Scanning. Watching. He'd learned long ago that it wasn't the noise that gave them away, it was the silence. And sure enough, on the edge of the lot, leaning casually against a car, was the man in the black coat. The same man he'd glimpsed near the tracks. He was waiting. Not moving. Just watching. Walter felt his throat tighten. He turned and walked toward the back of the building, quickening his pace as he pulled out the prepaid phone. It rang once, twice, then Marissa's voice. "Tell me you're somewhere safe." "I'm off the train," he said tersely. "But someone's still on me. Not Suits. Not police. Someone else." There was a pause. A longer one than he liked. Then her voice, lower this time. "I was afraid of that. Listen carefully, Walter. You're not just running from the stadium anymore. Someone else is in play. I can't protect you if he's already this close." "Who is he?" "Doesn't matter. All you need to know is he's not here to arrest you. He's here to make sure you don't talk. Understand?" Walter swallowed. "What do I do?" "Get to Detroit. Everything you need to disappear is waiting for you there. But you have to move now. No more stops. No more tricks. Just run." And then she hung up. Walter tossed the phone in a trash can and headed into the shadows behind the gas station. By the time he emerged on the next street over, he'd already flagged down a trucker willing to take cash for a ride north. The man didn't ask questions. Just let Walter climb in and stared straight ahead as the rig pulled back onto the road. But in the side mirror, far behind them, Walter saw headlights appear. Slow. Deliberate. The black car was following. And the man in the coat hadn't stopped watching. Imagine knowing someone's out there whose only job is to make sure you don't see the morning. Would you still keep running? Or would you stop and face them? Tell me how you'd play it in the comments below. Hours later, just outside Detroit, the trucker dropped Walter at a deserted diner on the outskirts of the city. "Good luck, buddy," he muttered as he drove off. Inside the diner, Marissa was already waiting in a corner booth. A single duffel bag sat on the seat beside her. She didn't smile when she saw him. She didn't even greet him. She just pushed the bag toward him and said, "If you're going to walk free, this is your last chance." Walter opened the bag. Inside, new passport, plane ticket, more cash than he'd ever seen, and at the bottom, a handgun wrapped in cloth. He looked up at her. "What's this for?" Marissa's eyes were cold. "For him. You'll know when it's time." And for the first time that night, Walter wondered if this was what he really wanted. To walk free. But at what cost? Walter stared at the gun in the bottom of the duffel bag, his fingers hesitating over the worn black grip. "For him," Marissa had said, her voice cold but steady. But Walter wasn't a killer. He'd never been that. Even after everything he'd done, the quiet scams, the backroom deals, the skimming and rerouting, it was all about staying invisible, not about hurting anyone. He closed the bag and slid it back across the table. "I'm not doing it." Marissa didn't flinch. Didn't even argue. She just nodded once and stood, leaving a key card on the table. "Room 315. Top floor." You've got 2 hours. After that, Walter stayed in the booth for a while, staring at the keycard. His coffee went cold. The clock ticked. And when he finally stood and walked outside, the night air felt heavier than before. Because he knew, somewhere close, the man in the black coat was still watching. The hotel was quiet when he arrived. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that prickled at the back of your neck. He slipped into room 315, locked the door behind him, and set the duffel on the bed. His new passport lay on top, next to a single envelope stamped with a red seal. Inside the envelope, his new name. His new life. But before he could even process it, the phone on the nightstand rang. Once. Twice. He picked up slowly. "Hello." A deep voice, unfamiliar but chilling. "You've made it this far. Impressive. But this is where it ends, Walter. You know that, don't you?" "Who is this?" Walter demanded, though his voice cracked. "Doesn't matter. What matters is what you choose in the next 60 seconds. And then silence. Walter dropped the phone and paced the room. His pulse thundered in his ears. 60 seconds. He glanced at the window, at the fire escape outside, at the duffel on the bed. And for the first time that night, he decided to stop running. When the door burst open moments later, the man in the black coat was ready. But so was Walter. He was already on the fire escape, already halfway down before the man even raised his weapon. Shots rang out, glass shattered, but Walter didn't stop. Didn't look back. By the time he hit the ground and vanished into the alley, the man in black was still shouting into his radio. Walter just kept moving. Faster than before. Freer than before. Sometimes, you don't need to win. Sometimes, just walking away is enough. Would you have stayed and fought? Or would you have kept running like Walter? Tell me your choice in the comments below. Walter disappeared into the night, duffel in hand, a ghost among the streetlights. And for the first time in 12 years, he smiled without forcing it. Because no matter how long they chased him, he'd already won. The sky was just starting to turn pale when Walter stopped walking. He'd put more miles behind him in the last 3 hours than he had in weeks. Through alleys, side streets, service tunnels. Always moving. Always watching. But now, as dawn broke over the city skyline, Walter found himself standing at the edge of the river, the wind cutting cold against his skin. This was the place. The duffel bag sat at his feet, the faint clink of cash and passports muffled inside. He crouched, ran his fingers over the stones at the water's edge, and pulled up a small metal hatch. Inside, just as Marissa had promised, was a dry pouch. One final envelope. One final ticket. Walter opened it. It was a one-way boarding pass. Private. No name, no seat number. Just a date. Today. When he straightened up, the faint sound of footsteps echoed behind him. He didn't have to turn to know who it was. The man in the black coat stood there, still as stone, watching him with those flat, unreadable eyes. And for the first time, Walter didn't feel fear. He just felt calm. "You followed me all this way," he said over his shoulder. "But you're too late now." The man in black didn't answer. Didn't move. He just stood there as Walter slung the duffel over his shoulder, climbed the embankment, and disappeared into the morning light. Some people say freedom has a price. But for Walter, walking away was priceless. What would you have done if you were him? Paid the price? Or stayed where it was safe? Let me know in the comments below. Your answer might surprise you. Later that morning, at a quiet airfield outside the city, Walter stepped onto the tarmac and handed his ticket to the waiting pilot. The engines roared to life. The door shut behind him. And as the plane lifted off, Walter looked out the window one last time, at the streets below, at the stadium in the distance, at the black car still parked by the river. And he smiled. Because this time, he was free.